And they put in the road.
I'll get one for you.
Right.
Jesus, I'd like to go out there and
From the 1920s.
Yeah,
Holly,
yeah, $1 a day.
Holly was very, we both smiled.
I think I remember
We both smiled.
somebody
I
gave
think I
us
even
a
giggled.
little
Yeah, you might
who
have.
were cleaning it.
you might have
We found this very old document from I can't remember what it was, but it's like a similar.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the regular meeting of the Logan Municipal Council. Our opening ceremony this evening will be done by Kurt Jensen. Kurt?
Okay, oh.
You don't
I'm not
even
used
have
to
to
that
do that.
microphone. That's, yeah, I didn't need to. I didn't realize it would, yeah, anyway. So I am here to get us going tonight and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So if everybody would rise. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very good. Thank you, everyone.
Say those words and you listen to the news and they have a lot, it's kind of a, there's a lot of meaning there. So our first, well, that's our first order of business. And next is the acceptance of the minutes and the approval of the agenda for this evening.
also move.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Our regular meeting schedule is the first and third Tuesdays. Our next meeting is November 15th. We will only have one meeting in December. It will be the first Tuesday. So just keep that on your calendar.
That means we only have 2 meetings left this year.
And then you don't have to look at me as chair anymore.
Oh, maybe we're going to reelect
Maybe
Oh,
we
maybe.
will. Maybe we will.
So,
as punishment.
For a job well done.
To get it right the next time.
yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Practice makes perfect. So now is the time in our agenda where we take questions and comments from the audience on items that are not otherwise on the agenda. If you would choose to speak, please come to the microphone, state your name, and take 3 minutes at the most. Anybody? Oh, we must be doing a good job. You guys don't have any comments. Anyway, we'll go forward. And we'll move on to the mayor and staff reports. Mayor, would you like to take the floor, so to speak?
Yes, thank you very much. We have a new appointment for the Forestry Board, Jamie Butters, who lives in the southwest portion of Logan. I know on our various boards and committees, we often try and, get representatives from different areas. So our city forester has spoken with Jamie, and I'd like to ask for your ratification for him to the Forestry Board.
Forestry Board actually met this last week and we discussed Jamie and he has our full support, so I will make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Good, and at this time, we have a report from Dr. Courtney Flint, who is over the Utah Wellbeing Project. She has done survey work for a number of cities throughout the state and is here to give us some information on that data that she's collected. So we'll now turn the time over to Dr. Flint.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Just gonna need to pull this up somewhere. There it is. All right. So it's a pleasure to have the City of Logan as a partner on the Utah Wellbeing Project. I'm Courtney Flint. I'm a professor in the Department of Environment and Society at Utah State. And so I'll just dive right in here. So as you can see, we have covered quite a few cities around the state, and our goals are really to provide leaders with the information on the well-being of their residents and other local perspectives to inform planning processes, general decision-making, and help you keep your finger on the pulse of your residents from one other vantage point than the other ones you already have. We also do comparative research on well-being around the state and the region as well. And increasingly, we're bridging our efforts with those of the Utah Department of Health, Department of Transportation, Get Healthy Utah, the Huntsman Cancer Institute, and so they're very appreciative of the opportunity to incorporate all the data from communities around the state. Our reports are online, so the Logan report is online with all of the rest of them, as well as a statewide report. So if you want more details, you can go there. So the survey is an online Qualtrics survey. It's at we do this in partnership with you at no cost to you. We just ask our city partners to lead the way on advertising and recruiting. We feel you know best how to reach the residents of your city, and so in that way we can keep the costs low. Last year we had about 563 respondents. This year 476 respondents. Really great survey participation, and I believe that you all do a great job getting it out to diverse audiences. We do track the demographics very closely. We like to be very transparent about who we've heard from and who we haven't. We're getting mostly full-time residents, 97%. The average length of residence is 19 years, and about 26% have lived in Logan for 5 years or less, so we are getting some of the newcomers as well as the long-standing residents. The survey, like any online survey like this, it does underrepresent some, those without a college degree, those who are unmarried, those who rent, those who are unemployed, those without children, those with incomes under $25,000, and those in the younger adult age group of 18 to 29. Pretty common for surveys, but in the future we're going to see what we can do to encourage responses from those groups as well. So diving into the findings here, 73% of the respondents answered on this question of their overall personal well-being a 4 or a 5. And while Logan City is slightly lower than the overall average here, I want to remind you that Logan's median household income is only $43,000. And so compared to a lot of the other cities, we don't have some of those higher levels of income. And there is a correlation between income and well-being. It's not a direct correlation, doesn't explain everything, but it's a factor here. And so as we look on to the community well-being, this is also slightly below average, but in line with some of the other communities there, like Harriman, Saratoga Springs, and even Park City in terms of community well-being. So we often see it a little bit lower than the personal well-being. But the good news here is that overall personal well-being increased quite dramatically. I think, we're all on a scale of 1 to 5 here, but still an upward trajectory here from 2021 to 2022, which is really nice to see. And the community well-being has stayed the same. Now, we go in and we break down well-being in this survey in 10 different domains or categories. And what we do is we have folks rate their well-being in these different areas and also tell us how important these areas are to their overall well-being. That allows us to do this sort of matrix. And the highest rated domains are all of these here. Safety and security is the highest rated here for the Logan respondents. Education, connection with nature, very high compared to many other cities. Physical and mental health and living standards there as well. And the most important, which is very common, living standards, safety and security, physical and mental health, that's common across all of our cities. What you do not have this year is anything in the red zone, another piece of really good news. The red zone would be this lower right quadrant. That's for things that are really important to folks, but rated a little lower than average. And last year, mental health and local environmental quality were in that zone, and so they've just moved out of that area. So no red zone domains for Logan this year. The other really good news is all of these domains, except for living standards, and given this is also not unique to Logan, the times are a little tougher for folks, but all of these other categories of well-being have increased at least a little bit in the past year. So some would say this is indicative of some of a bounce back from our COVID, or the worst of our COVID days. We don't have the 2020 data to compare it to here, but this is nonetheless a really good trajectory in all of these categories. We look at the degree to which people take action together in response to local problems or opportunities, sort of a perceived community action. And Logan really has a normal bell-shaped curve here and a little on the low side of everybody. But given that we have a lot of students in our community as well, that might sort of influence, I think, some of this sort of community action piece. We ask how connected do people feel to Logan as a community, and those scores come up into the very much middle range compared to other cities of this size. It's actually ahead of some of the other cities of around this size. So, but what we found is that this community connection variable is probably the most striking finding with regard to well-being. When we look at overall well-being, we see that the higher the levels of community connection, the higher levels of overall personal well-being. And we see it across the board with all of the other categories or domains of well-being too. This community connection, feeling that sense of belonging to the community, seems to be very influential. And that led us to spend some time over the last year with some Utah State University extension funds to develop a set of resources for how to address some of these areas of well-being in community connection and some of these others. So we have quite a few resources that are targeted for cities, developed by cities or initiatives that work with cities, not academic kinds of papers, but quite accessible ideas about how to improve well-being in these areas. We also asked this year about participation in recreation and nature-based activities in Logan. We've got so many people that enjoy to connect with wildlife and birds in their yard or neighborhood. They recreate in the parks. Gosh, over 80% of people recreating in our parks, which is great. Non-motorized recreation on public lands or waters, gardening very high, and so forth. And you can see the list coming down. And the really striking thing is that a number of these things, from city recreation programs, motorized recreation, non-motorized recreation, recreating in the parks, and enjoying the wildlife and birds, are connected to a variety of things: the personal well-being, community connection, community well-being. And so these are really important efforts that are apparently appreciated by those people. The people who get involved in this have those stronger connections, and thus that overall personal well-being goes up. So some nice findings there. This role of landscapes is something we've asked for a few years. We'll probably stop asking it moving forward because we always get the same response. Everybody loves natural landscapes in Utah. Everywhere we ask these questions, and the farmland is strikingly high here in Cache Valley. People really appreciate that, and even the Red Rocks. I think they enjoy the opportunities they get to go further south in the state. When we bring in the development and industrial sorts of landscapes, we get much more of a mixed response, some but quite neutral, and a few more on the negative side than in the natural landscapes, but that's really common across our cities. We've asked questions about describing the current rate of population growth as well as the current pace of economic development. And generally, we've got our respondents saying population growth on the fast side here in Logan. We also have just above the 50% mark saying too fast on the pace of economic development. And how is this changing? Well, both are going up quite strongly from 2021 to 2022. So we're really leaping forward in terms of the perceptions that growth, both population and economic growth, are quite fast. So Logan is right up here as we compare it to other cities. It's not unique in this perception of rapid growth, very much like other cities along the Wasatch Front. And I should have said that we do classify these cities together and have included Logan in its Utah League of Cities and Towns caucus group of the established mid-sized cities. And for data aggregation purposes, we've lumped that in with the cities of the first and second class, though we fully recognize that there's a big difference between a city of Logan and a city of Draper. But it gives us, at least we're comparing a few more apples to apples and oranges to oranges than perhaps comparing with Bluff and Delta and Blanding, if you see what I mean. And then the concerns, we've always asked about a number of different concerns. This year for Logan City, the top 3 were affordable housing, air quality, and water supply. These are the top 3 across the state. This is not particularly unique to Logan. These numbers are consistent with many of the cities in the study. A little lower on roads and transportation than many of the other cities, but that's still 3/4 of the respondents having a moderate or a major concern about roads and transportation, and then over 80% on these other things. Water supply has really shot up in the last year. We're seeing that move up 10, 20 percentages all over the state. So water supply is definitely a concern as this region experiences a drought. It seems to have elevated in concern. You can see the other things. Climate change is high for Logan compared to other cities. Access to mental health care is also quite high. Opportunities for youth and suicide. These things are a little bit higher than some of the other cities, and certainly over 50% on a variety of these things listed. We also ask people what they value about living and working in Logan. They love things that are anything to do with outside, being in nature, open spaces, the outdoor recreation opportunities. They generally feel quite safe. They like the positive social climate, feel people are friendly, and that sense of community people do talk about. They like the smaller town feel, and they feel that the amenities are adequate and increasing. They really like the new additions to our community. We have many open-ended comments also. We have an additional comment section, and you can see the areas that they write in, some quite positive, some a little snarky, and but they are all, we provide them to you in their raw form, and I think Teresa has a copy of the open comments report if you should like to see that. There are pages and pages and pages, and they're very thoughtful. We do get quite a few responses. Compared to many surveys, online surveys, we get people who really take the time to write their comments, upwards of 35–40% of people doing that, which is quite unheard of. So Logan really does get a lot of feedback. And so with that, I'll just say thank you. Our next survey effort won't be until early 2024. Survey fatigue is a very real thing. We don't want to burn people out. We would like to continue to partner with you and the other cities, and we want to be mindful of the time and efforts of the people who respond to the survey. We also want to spend some more time with the data. I'm teaching a class next semester, Building Community Environmental Resilience. We'll have teams of senior students doing deep dives in a few communities. If Logan were interested, we could certainly incorporate you into that. And then we also need to do some fundraising. We're running this project on just less than $15,000 a year, and as this number of cities that are interested expands, it's not sustainable. So we're going to do some big time fundraising over the next year to support this effort, and we'd love to have you continue to participate with it. So thanks for your time. I'd be happy to answer any quick questions you have.
Thank you.
You indicated in one place the only thing going down was standard of living.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that that had something to do with the inflation, which is a national issue.
Right. I think that we're seeing sort of, troubling times economically for some folks. The prices, cost of living is going up, cost of housing is going up very high, and these things probably just bundled into that living standards. The ability, how far your dollar goes.
Yeah, it wouldn't be pertinent to Logan as a city.
Correct. And many of these items, they're rating their own experiences. We don't know that it necessarily has anything to do with Logan, but these are the aggregate numbers for your respondents. All perceived, all perceptions and experiences from residents. The other great thing we have coming up is the Healthy Places Index has just become available, and now that's a bunch of indicators that have been put out by the Department of Health and Department of Transportation, and we're now going to be able to work to compare those findings, the objective indicator measures and our perceived survey responses. So we'll be doing that over the next year.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Great. Thank you very much. We appreciate that report and that information for us.
You're welcome.
And I wouldn't mind participating as a deep dive.
Yeah. I was thinking that would be interesting for the city as well. So
Because I would like to figure out, we get a lot of, we have people who do work at the university on various and sundry topics. And all of it is valuable, but I would like us to be able to figure out a way to incorporate it into some of our decisions moving forward, because I think it helps to inform what we're trying to accomplish overall. So.
Right. That'd be great. We can definitely put a team with Logan and meet with you early in the semester to figure out what areas would be of more interest to dive into, so you can convey that back to me if you have specific comments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, one last very brief item. I am proclaiming November 26, 2022 as Small Business Saturday. And there's a long proclamation, I won't read it, but just to say that our small businesses contribute so much to our economy. And it's sort of a reminder to, shop small. It's that Saturday, to kind of kick off the Christmas season after Thanksgiving. And again, just support our local businesses. Hopefully with this, we encourage everyone to remember those local small businesses and shop there to show your support. So that's all for my report tonight.
Thank you. Council Business Planning Community, Planning Commission update. There were 3 items that were covered in the Planning Commission last Thursday. One of them we have received some letters regarding already. It's the watermark rezone, which is out on the highway closer to Nibley. And the request of the proponent is to rezone it from commercial to multifamily high. And I know we'll be talking about that some more. Fairway Lofts, design review and rezone. Mike, that is the community commercial, right?
Neighborhood center.
Neighborhood center, okay. Tony Johnson has a piece of property that's close to the fairgrounds on 4th West that he would like to have be rezoned to neighborhood commercial. And he plans on, we'll find out about that too as well, because that also comes to us.
Well, it actually used to be a little neighborhood store, isn't that correct?
Yeah.
So it was one of the historic neighborhood markets, so
Right.
kind of an interesting note.
And a couple of things were, they continued those, and lastly, we will be discussing tonight the moderate income housing plan. So those were the items from Planning Commission. We've been asked to have a for the opportunity to present on the Utah Watershed Council Act. Andy Rasmussen and Dan Adams from the Langdon Group will be sharing their information with us. Thank you.
While Andy's setting up there, I'm Dan Adams, and Mark Stratford had, met with the council and then followed up with me and asked if we would come talk, I'm sure, about the Watershed Council Act, and so that's what got us here today.
All right. So I'm Andy Rasmussen. Langdon Group, just by way of introduction, is a subsidiary of JUB Engineering. We've been contracted by the Utah Division of Water Resources to implement Utah Watersheds Act. This is a bill passed 2020 by the legislature, passed last days of the session in March, and then the world stopped. So there was a little bit of a delay in implementation. We were contracted in 2021 to try to stand these up. Now, I'm going to kind of just give you a basic overview of the bill and then kind of update you where we are currently. Let's go to the next one. So the bill called for the formation of 11 local watershed councils. According to the map you see here, there will be a 12th as well. That'll be the Great Salt Lake Watershed Council. That'll include stakeholders and probably representatives from the local councils of the 5 watersheds you see there in gray that contribute water to the Great Salt Lake. So it'll be a total of 12 councils, local councils. It also established a statewide council that is up and running. I'll talk about that in a minute. And so that'll be the total of 13 total councils, 12 local and then 1 statewide council, which they kind of will coordinate with. We'll get to this list on the left in just a minute here, but for next one. So just a brief overview here, what these councils were envisioned to be. This is kind of the culmination of a years-long process, really. I remember I used to work with Trout Unlimited and being part of meetings in 2016, 2017, talking about how we needed to organize councils statewide. There's a lot of discussion for years from all stakeholders all across the state on how to do that. The bill itself was in development for 2 years before it finally was introduced in the House, the Utah House. So it represents the culmination of a lot of effort. And the idea was, let me grab my, just so I can reference code language here. The idea was to convene councils on a local level that would encourage and facilitate discussion and collaboration. That's language directly from the code on all water-related activities, water-related interests. Now, we just heard from the previous presentation, that's on everybody's mind with the drought. We live in Utah. Water-related activities can reach into just every part of life, can be dang near anything. It's the old joke that in the West, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. And I was kind of wondering what that meant for Utah, where less whiskey was consumed. But nonetheless, I had actually
The fighting part is good.
Yeah, the fighting part.
Yeah, the fighting part's true.
Right.
Yeah.
I had two of my great-great-grandfathers helped to settle Smithfield, and they were up in the fort up there. Their whole lives, you read those records, their whole lives were just entirely dependent on that tiny little Summit Creek, for decades. And the more things change, the more they stay the same, as far as that goes in Utah. So that's what we're looking at. The statewide council is to kind of coordinate the efforts and the information gathered in the local councils, and also to shepherd some coordination with the legislature, with state and federal agencies. Local councils can do that as well, but on a statewide level, it will be handled by the Utah Watershed Council. A couple of things I wanted to mention, what the councils are not, and this is very specific through the drafting process. They are not replacements or replicas, or not to supersede or usurp any existing group. No, whether that's a water district or other collaboratives or partnerships, those things are to become part of the process and maybe contribute members and expertise to the councils, but they don't supersede those. They also have zero regulatory authority of any kind. They have no adjudicative or infrastructure, financing, enforcement powers of any kind. Purely collaborative, informational, and the opportunity to really bring all water interests together in one clearinghouse. And as we've done this work over the last few years and other current work in water in Utah, it's not even so much sometimes that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. Sometimes the right hand isn't aware that there is a left hand. And so that's that's kind of the gap that these councils are designed to fill. So back to this slide, there are 11 interests. Of course, there are more interests involved in water, but there are 11 interests that the Act specifically designates that where feasible, these interests should be represented on the local councils. Now, the Utah Watershed Council has just ratified some organizing documents that recommend these councils will include no less than 9 and no more than 21 members. But within that range of membership, they're encouraged to include as many of these interests as possible. So agriculture, and that can be, there's a lot of different possibilities there. In the Bear River watershed, which is where we are here, obviously, some of those possibilities might include something like the Cattlemen's Association, the Farm Bureau, other associations, or even individuals. Industry needs to be represented, again, up here, something like Pacificor, maybe USU, paper mill, those kinds of things. Indian tribes, obviously, be the Shoshone up here. Public water suppliers, this could be something like just municipal staff having a representation on the council. Water planning and research institutions and water quality, up here, obviously both of those could be staffed by somebody from the university in various capacities. Water-dependent habitat and environments and fish and wildlife, kind of some similar groups there. You'd have maybe some representation potentially by somebody like TU or Trout Unlimited or Ducks Unlimited, Nature Conservancy. On habitat environments, that might be Bear River Land Conservancy, that kind of thing. Watershed management, obviously that's a great spot for Nathan Dogs and the Cache Water District there. Mutual irrigation companies, Bear River Canal, and one of the many up here. Local sponsors of reclamation projects. Up here, we were talking about that in meeting with Nathan's group, and that there might be some interest there from the Newton water users, maybe even the Wellsville Mendon Conservancy District that runs Hiram Dam, that kind of a thing. And then at the bottom, you see the local council may invite state and federal agencies to designate a liaison to the local council. So you can get a coordination across all levels. And they don't have to, but that's something that the act allows them to do. Just to orient us to where we are now, as I said, there was a little bit of a delay from passage to implementation because of COVID, but January, well, really all of 21, Dan spent, taking a road show around the state here and interviewing dozens, or was it hundreds?
Hundreds.
Hundreds of stakeholders of all kinds, from ag, from the conservation community, from the water management and districts, even some municipalities, I believe. So interviewing people just to get their thoughts on the act and on its implementation and what they felt about what might be the best path forward in their particular area and in their watershed. And then compiling all of that data and those interviews and using that to inform the rest of the process. That brought us to this year. We did convene finally the Utah Watershed Council, the statewide council, in January. They have met quarterly ever since, and are beginning to conduct some good business there. One of their first orders of business this summer and fall has been to create and draft some organizing documents, policies, and kind of bylaws as a template for the local councils. Once they're up and running, they can use that as a template to kind of get up faster. They don't have to. There are some things in code they have to follow, but they can use the template the state council has created. And then also, we're just in the process now of finalizing a convening process for those. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. That's where we are now. So this fall and winter, we're going to be standing up 2 to 3 local councils. We're aiming for Bear River up here, the Weber River, and the Jordan River, most likely. And there's a number of reasons for those 3 going first, not the least of which is the...
Great Salt Lake.
Yes, thank you. the elephant in the room. There's a lot of encouragement and even maybe pressure to organize that Great Salt Lake Council, get it up and running to kind of, again, act as a clearinghouse for all the efforts that are going on there. Given that, it certainly behooves the local councils that feed into the Great Salt Lake to organize prior to or at least concurrent with the Great Salt Lake Council, so that there can be some local meaning local to Bear River, local to Weber, local input on that process for the Great Salt Lake. So that's where we are for these next few months, and then after that, it'll be standing up the rest of the 9 statewide for the next couple of years.
So can I ask,
Yeah.
will you create, when you create the Great Salt Lake, if you've already created the Jordan, Weber, and Bear, will members of those watershed councils be a part of the Great Salt Lake Council?
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, not exclusively,
Right.
you'd have other people
They
as
will
well.
have representation, yeah.
Okay.
Each of the 5 local councils that around the Great Salt Lake will each have at least 1 seat on the Great Salt Lake Council. And then all 12 of the local watershed councils will have a seat on the statewide council. So that way, all those local councils have a direct path to the statewide council, and then there's a direct path from the statewide council to the legislature and to the governor. So it's really is bringing all those efforts and information and everything everybody's doing has a process to go right to our state's elected officials.
So where we are right now in the process, just bouncing off that timeline, as I said, the organizing documents and policies template, kind of the bylaws for these local councils was just approved by the state council. That's ready to go. Now we're working on this formation process and just how exactly we're going to convene them. Initially, we're just going to talk to a lot of the stakeholders in each council, or in each geographic area of the council, in each watershed, and create kind of a straw man list of potential members, and then we'll do some refining of that list through further conversations. One source we certainly want to hear from and hear recommendations, names specifically, is the municipal councils and the county commission, county council as well. So I can email Teresa that our information. If you have any names you think would fit one of those 11 interests, or somebody you think would be a good idea, shoot them all, and we'll get them on the list.
Who makes the final decision?
Makes the final decision of who will be on
Who's
the
on
East
it.
Local. It really will be locally driven. So it'll be, we'll take all those names, as Andy said, and we'll go and share those back with all the groups that we've met with, elected officials, all those folks, and get feedback on that. We'll then probably have with each one of those a convening where we'll have a meeting where we can share with everybody. And we'll probably do those as virtual meetings so we can get as many participants as possible, because a lot of these councils cover a really large geographic area. And we'll be able to share back, hey, here's the 13 people that we heard, and share that back and see if there's support for that. And then each of the local councils will take their, it's really, let me back 1 second. One thing that's really important is that the councils really need to be diverse. We're looking for diverse membership that represents as many interests as we can in each one of those local watershed councils. So they will, once they initially form like that, they'll then take and go to the statewide council to become certified. So the statewide council is actually who kind of does that final check if they feel like the local council has met all the needs that it needs to meet. So
Like, you're not good, we don't want you on that?
what's that?
We don't want, no, that person, no.
Yeah.
So my question, I mean, it's like you're gathering names,
Uh-huh.
and you're gathering names from interest groups, I assume. But will you make that decision on who's in the group?
No, we won't make a decision. We'll just take all that information we've gathered, kind of with that guidelines that Andy talked about with 9 to 21 people. You know, if they fit within that with the list of people they have and it represents the diversity that needs to be on there, you know, they can have more than 11, that's fine.
Are these groups static once they're formed?
Nope, they will change over time, and this is another place where there is flexibility for each local council to kind of decide how they want to play. Up here, we've had fantastic business with people. Bragg, a lot of different water organizations. Andy mentioned meeting with Nathan Doggs and their board. Their board volunteered to create a straw man of thoughts and ideas about who could be, you know, what the seats could be, what kind of rotation schedule could you have, you know, moving a chair and a vice chair and how that could be played with. And actually what was come up with here is really what helped inform and guide the statewide council in this work that Andy's been talking about of the organizing documents. So your community has been leading out in that effort already in that, and they've been really helpful with that. So, but it really, the state does not want to dictate how each one of those local councils should be formed. So they're trying to give some good guidance, but it's really, it needs to be locally driven for it to work over time.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah. What's kind of been helpful too, Oregon has been doing watershed councils now for 25 years. Colorado has been doing it for 17 years. And so we've had some just fantastic conversations with these other states who have been playing this game for quite a while and kind of lessons learned. I'm actually from Oregon, was on one of the first watershed councils there. And so it's been helpful to call old colleagues. What do we do? Help me out. So.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, the last part is just what Dan mentioned there, how the meetings we've had up here and how they've really driven the process. That's been really useful, you know, to be able to have the Cache Valley and Box Elder County kind of leading out on this. Just leads us to the last bit here, the next steps, what we've already talked about. We're working with the state council to ratify kind of a year one onboarding process for these councils. So once we get them stood up, they have a path forward and an organizing schedule. And so that's what we're doing right now. We're continuing to organize and convene Bear, Jordan, and Weaver stakeholders and put these lists together and move forward. I'm working to establish the dates here the next few months on the steps we need to take, and that's what we're about. So that's it.
One of the reasons I think it's important for you to know that this watershed council is important is because I think it's your watershed council is almost a mini version of what's happening with the whole state with ag to urban conversion, multi-basin water systems, tremendous amount of growth, but yet a lot of strong cultural values around ag and those things. So you kind of have it all up here. And so that was one of the reasons we felt like this would be a really good first council to get up and going, because you could really help set a model and how to do it for the rest of the state. So great.
Any other questions?
Okay, just hope I'm not being either ignorant or something, but what will be the deliverables? What will you hope to accomplish in specific? I see the organization, I see the representation, I see the need, but what will you or this organization do?
That's a really good question. And it's kind of funny because when I asked the other states that have been doing it for a while, that was the first question they all asked me as well. So what's your funding source and how are you going to actually get stuff done? So the linchpin of successful councils is that they not only just convene and have good communication, good collaboration, but they actually get things done. So they can point to things with a diverse group and say, we did that. And so that part about having things you can actually accomplish is really important. With the other states, they actually have through their state programs funding that comes to the local watershed councils, and it helps them to do projects and get things done. Thus far in the act, we do not have funding. So that is something that we might see change over time. What I think we'll see happen in the interim is that there are so many examples of where funding sources are available, but that it's not widely known or widely shared about those funding opportunities. So with the shared stewardship with Department of Ag and the state of Utah, there's all kinds of funding opportunities. NRCS, one of the things I learned going and doing all these interviews is that a lot of these agencies, even within a one watershed, will have multiple projects that, again, like Andy said, the right and left hand don't even know that the two projects are happening. So I think just that improved communication is going to help people to see how they can get projects done, where they went to go get funding. So I think that part's going to be really great. The federal agencies we've met with are all talked about funding that they have available, but they need a pathway to engage with the communities in order to even make that funding available. And so I think that's going to be helpful. Another really quick example, when we met with the Cache Water Conservancy District, is they talked about how it's really difficult for the Department of Water Resources to communicate to the many organizations that exist in the Bear River Watershed Council area. And so by having one watershed council where all those organizations can come, it makes it really easy for the state to go to one meeting and communicate to everybody. And so just that alone, I think the efficiency in that will help to move projects, solve problems, understand policy. A lot of those things I think will come from that. That'll be, add value real quick. So.
Well, I also think that one thing that the and I'm speaking maybe out of turn, but I think the watershed councils can be a link between the legislature and the local communities, and a backwards and forwards, that the water districts, as they're established, have a more challenging time being, because they're really basically a business.
Yes.
And if you, but it does concern me that you talk about projects, because you don't have any regulatory authority in these councils, so I would think that they would have to function more as communication devices from, this up to the state legislature and back.
That is both the vision and the reality of the code. That's exactly how the bill was written. Yeah. And that's the dance when you're talking about projects. They don't have any regulatory or enforcement or financing authority.
Right.
But they can be the clearinghouse to bring all those resources together and kind of facilitate it that way.
That's a lot to ask.
Yes, it is.
It is kind of, Andy and I are both working on the integrated plan for the Great Salt Lake as well that's just starting off. And it was kind of funny. We had some folks up in this area saying, you know, like, don't go too fast, you know, like wanted to pump the brakes. Then all of a sudden the New York Times article came and this other work's happening. All of a sudden it's reversed. Like, hey, how fast can we get this up and going? So it's good to have that urgency and something to kind of coalesce around as well. So.
Well, I think it's important because I do believe that there is often the perception that different watersheds have less or more influence based on the strength of their water district.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's important.
Yeah.
Anyway, any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Informative.
Oh, my clock doesn't work, so I can't look up there and see if I'm on time or not on time.
We're 5 minutes behind.
Oh my gosh.
Way to go, Jeannie.
Okay, we'll move now to our action items. We have 2 this evening. They're both public hearings. The first one is a budget adjustment. Rich, I'm going to let you take it.
One item to consider, a request to appropriate $1,275. It is a reimbursement for federal cases worked by our police officers.
Any questions on that? This is a public hearing. If anyone would like to speak to this, please come to the microphone, state your name. Seeing no one, I'll bring it back to the council for a decision.
I'll move approval of Resolution 2243.
I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Our second public hearing is Kirk Jensen.
Okay, council, do we have a mic over here?
Right there in front of you.
Okay, it's been a while since I've been up here, so
Oh, you get 2 opportunities.
reorienting myself to the
Two
technology.
chances today.
Yeah.
Okay, so tonight we are talking about potential disposition of city property that's located at 650 North, 800 West approximately. I'll show you. There is an aerial, hopefully you can see that large enough. There's a red rectangular box around the parcel that the city owns that's on the east side of 800 West. So Schreiber's would be to the north, and that is what we're proposing to sell. It's about 1 acre parcel to an entity called 2U Logan LLC. So this is a real estate entity really backed by this Red Rock Realty Investments, which is headquartered in Irvine, California, and they have some affiliate relationships with the Dutro Company. So if I just back up here, Dutro is to the far right of that diagram. That's where they manufacture material handling equipment.
Bill Dutro.
Yeah.
So the vacant ground immediately east of our parcel, this entity 2U Logan LLC has already acquired that. They plan on doing an expansion project there, which will involve all 3 of those affiliates there. Dutro being one. Dutro would expand its operations. And then Skywalker Trampolines, which is headquartered in Brigham City but does its manufacturing in China. They'll also basically roll all those operations, consolidate them here into a new facility here in Logan. And then the third one is a modular barn manufacturer out of Irvine, California, which is currently doing some manufacturing in China, and I believe their intent's to, cease to do manufacturing over there, reshore it here, and open a manufacturing facility on this piece of land. Not our piece of land, but adjacent to it.
You know what their potential job creation?
It's a great question, and they did tell me, I don't have that top of mind. I want to say 40 to 60, but
Okay.
I could confirm that offline later. And that, so you got 3 different entities that would kind of roll into that, but I can check on that number. Here's a preliminary site plan. Of course, nothing at this point has gone to Planning Commission, and really the lion's share of the development would be on their owned parcel. However, the 1 acre strip that we own adjacent to 800 West just kind of polishes off the development, makes ingress, egress a little bit easier, but of course all this is preliminary. They'd have to bring this to Planning Commission to get their site plan approved. Preliminary rendering of what they anticipate building to house these 3 companies. The purchase agreement terms, an appraisal was performed, valued the property at $170,000. Again, for 1 acre parcel, there are a little bit of wetlands impacting the north part of the parcel. And the purchase would be contingent upon them developing the property. We didn't want to our intent's not to just sell, but to basically see the net result be some expansion of industrial manufacturing and some employment growth. Okay, so
When did Logan acquire that property?
2015.
Okay.
What was the reason at the time that we acquired it?
Public Works would
I
probably
think
have a
Sam
better...
knows that.
Yeah.
He's raising
Sam.
his hand.
Sam,
with
do you know that? Okay.
It was what?
He's shaking his
Sam.
head yes.
Oh,
In 2016, 2015, Public Works built 800 West, that connection right there. So it's a remaining parcel from building that road.
And is the road adequate for the additional building and activity that is probably going to occur in that neighborhood in the near future?
Like Kirk mentioned, those are just preliminary plans. We haven't done any studies on what they're proposing or what the traffic analysis would be. But I do know 800 West was built to the master plan at the time. So my gut answer is yes, but we haven't done any studies to confirm that.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think when that extension of 800 West was built. I want to say about 2012-ish or...
It was more like 2016,
Okay, a little
2017.
bit later. Okay.
It wasn't very long ago.
No, it wasn't very long ago.
Okay.
But isn't 800 West also 10th North and 800 West? Isn't that right by, where is this in relationship to Costco?
600 north.
Costco's directly west.
It's about 2 blocks south.
It's 2 blocks south of that?
Yeah.
Okay. But that 800 West, it can accommodate the traffic that might be generated from additional, I just don't want to sell property that we are going to end up having to get back later. And then there'll be a building on it and we won't be able to.
I wasn't a part of it, but I know I've talked to Paul about this, and Public Works has given its blessing to selling off this parcel.
Okay.
If that answers
They
your
don't have big plans in store
No,
for it.
we
so-
don't.
Okay,
Okay, it's just kind of a stepchild.
all right.
Yeah.
Any further questions of
Whatever's
Kurt
left
or
over. Okay.
Sam?
No.
This is a public hearing. If anybody would like to speak to this issue, please come forward. State your name.
Dr. Gail Yost, I live here in Logan. I'm just wondering if these manufacturers are national, international, or are they mostly local for the kind of process and sales that they will be doing?
It's a good question, Gil. I believe Dutro is primarily national. Less familiar with the Skywalker company. And the other one too, I'd have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
I haven't really researched their...
Would you please get back to me on
Yeah,
that?
I
I'm
gotcha.
just interested in keeping
For sure.
track of what's going on in my community. So it's not in any way a negative, it's just keeping track. Okay?
Good question.
Skywalker trampolines are America's safest trampoline.
Is there
That's
such
what-
a
that's
thing
what
as
it
a
says
safe
right there.
trampoline? I don't know. Let's ask the orthopedic surgeons.
Yeah, America's safest trampoline is no trampoline.
Thank you, Gail.
I'm
Would anyone
just
else care to
floating
speak
there.
to this?
Yeah, so grass.
Seeing no one, I'll bring it back to council.
I love the fact that they're bringing industry here and largely that some of them are coming from China.
Yes,
This is a really good thing.
I like that too.
So I would move approval of this
Say that
sale.
again?
So actually, no action by the council, it's just a discussion and input.
Fine, I'll just say I like it.
That works too.
Do you want a head nod or nothing?
Whatever discussion, comment.
If Public Works is okay,
Yeah.
It's just the requirement is that if the sale price is over $100,000, we do have to have a public hearing just to make people aware of.
and we had it
What we're
appraised
planning.
and, everybody feels good about the price that we're getting for it.
The
so-
mayor gets to sell it if she wants to.
But we want to make you aware.
I know.
Awesome.
So that's all you need from us?
That's all we need.
Okay.
Thank
Then
you.
we did what we were to. Thank you, Kurt. All right, workshop items. Mike?
Thanks for killing trees.
You're welcome. Time.
5 minutes.
Unless you want to do the other workshop item first, come out of the way.
No, it's okay. We can't change the order now.
Oh.
And Rich just loves to sit here. So.
I
he's
can
good.
talk really slow for Rich's sake.
Last, always last.
So this is the 2022 moderate income housing plan. If you all recall, we just did this about 2.5 years ago. We had so much fun, we want to do it again.
But we're having to do it because.
State mandate. Yep. So I'll go through this pretty briefly. I gave you a copy of the slideshow. You got a copy of the plan and other supporting documentation. It's pretty much the same that we've got on the books now. We just updated the data. The word of the day, though, it's dated to 2020. So here it is, 2022. We're always kind of late on getting data because it's just the way it works from our sources. So some of the information, like, it doesn't make sense, like cost of living and rental prices and things like that. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. This is the best data we have access to. So, but we'll paint a picture, and that's really the goal. And then we'll jump into the actual strategies that the commission recommended to you, and then we'll adopt as part of the plan. So moderate income housing, it's housing for household with gross income equal to or less than 8% of the AMI. Talk about that in a minute. This slide's self-explanatory. So the state adopted House Bill 462 in 2022. It changed how we report on our moderate income housing plan progress. It forces us to use their strategies, at least pick from them, develop an implementation strategies, and then when we report back every year, we'll be able to quantify and qualify the successes that we've had. This was due October 1st, so we're a little bit late. We just need to get this workshop tonight, hopefully passed at the next meeting, then we should be okay with the state. I kind of went through the highlights of 462. You can read those in the handout I gave you. And the important thing about why we want to comply with it is that what's at stake is our transportation project funding, so our TIF funds and TTIF funds, things that we would have access to. If we don't do a moderate income housing plan that meets the qualifications of the state, we won't be able to access those funds. So. Now, the requirement is that we have at least 5 recommendations, or 5 strategies, I'm sorry. I gave the direction of the planning commission, come up with 8. That way we can kind of pare them back down so that we have at least some flexibility in it. Doesn't mean that less is better or more is better. It's just you need to at least have 5 as we move forward. So I'll go through the demographic trends pretty quickly. Our current population is a little over 52,000. We are at a 1.2% annual growth rate. And this shows you what we would expect if the growth rate was to change over a decadal type of evaluation. This shows what that looks like and translates into on this type of a graph. So if we hit a 2% growth rate, here's where we're going to end up. This is where Cache County is on their trajectory. Oops, wrong way. Same thing. So we, since 2000 to 2020, we've grown by 10,000 people. But again, it's just a 1.2% growth rate. And this compares us with everybody else. You look, for example, at Nibley, over the last 20 years, they've grown just under 13%. Providence is just under 4.5%. The Cache County in total is just under 2%.
They started a lot smaller though, so it's easier to have a higher percentage growth.
Yeah, so it's kind of comparing apples to oranges. So our average household size and median age is 23.8, so we have a younger population, and we have a smaller household size, and those numbers are slowly going down. Here's our age distribution. It should be pretty apparent to everybody, but we obviously have a lot of college kids and young families in our city. So here's your college ages, 15 to 34, young married kids, I say people with young kids under the age of 5. And then as you see, they kind of mature in that early phase. They start moving out to other cities. We're racially diverse, relatively speaking, for Utah. 87% of our population is white. We're also ethnically diverse. 12% is Hispanic or Latino. We've got about 9% of our population with a disability. We've got a fairly high rate of poverty in Logan, so about 27% of our residents live below the poverty line. This shows you the breakdown by race and ethnicity. Here are the guidelines for 2022 poverty guidelines. So a family of 4, 100% is 27,750. So if you're below that mark, then you're living below poverty. So here's our 2020 median household income is $43,056. It's actually a positive change in 2016. Our per capita income is $18,905 in 2016, and then it jumped to $19,000. That's a positive change. And this reflects, again, the age of a bulk of our residents. They work the jobs like In-N-Out Burger and Anderson's Speed and Seed, things like that. This shows the growth or the changes in various income ranges. You can see that the growth is down here in these lower ends of the economic strata as compared to the upper. So as part of the moderate income housing plan, we look at providing housing. We reference back the area median income, which is a little deceiving in terms of Logan proper. But when you look at the entire region, the AMI is 71,000. Our median household income is 43,000. Our per capita income is 19,000. And the reason why we look at AMI is because if you're living in Logan, you're competing for housing, you're competing region-wide, not just in Logan. But yet, you look at the bulk of our population, again, it's younger, a little bit poorer, so it's a little deceptive in how we compete region-wide for housing. Now, as we drill into the 80% of AMI, and these are the kind of the target ranges, the 80% of AMI, where we start talking moderate income housing, is 59,300. And then when you look at the number of households in Logan that are at or below those types of ranges, about 65% of our total households are at or below that 80% AMI mark. So we have a pretty large percentage of our population that's at that mark.
That is a lot. Yeah.
So I went with the summary, I just did that. Let's go to the housing trends. This is a big one for everybody. So in 2000, our owner occupancy rate was 44%. We're down to about 38.6%. So a slow decline in owner occupancy, a slight incline in renter occupied. When you look at this chart in the report, this number is a little deceptive. We actually have about 18,500 total housing units in the city. When the census goes through and does the analysis on housing, they say that about 8 to 9% of our housing stock is vacant. I'm not quite sure that's entirely accurate. You know, if they're taking the count in June, when the kids have gone, before summer citizens get here, maybe. But it's a little deceptive in terms of how they quantify what's vacant or not. But what we do know is that of our owner occupancy, the bulk of our ownership is in single family. So 82% of our owner occupied housing stock is in single family, whereas only 15% of renter occupied housing is in single family. And the bulk of that housing for renter occupied is in multifamily housing. This gives you a balance or a view of what we have for housing structures or structure types. The bulk of it is in detached single family, and then in these other types of units, 2 to 4 family units.
But the detached single-family being the bulk, but this chart said that only
Doesn't mean it.
one unit detached 82%, so there's
Yeah, 40
18% that are single-family that aren't single-family?
No, 42% of the total housing stock, so you look on the
Yeah.
left-hand side of the chart.
Yeah.
So of our total housing stock that's occupied, 42% or 41% is basically single family.
Okay.
This number is 82% of just this number of owner-occupied housing. So in terms of what's the percentage of single family owner-occupied of the entire housing stock? It's about 75%. If that makes any sense.
Makes my head.
This just shows you a visual breakdown of those different types of housing.
So this detached single-family is actually single-family, it's not
Correct.
divided up?
Right, attached single family would be like your typical townhome.
Okay, thank you.
Age of housing stock, we've got housing stock, a large chunk of it was built from 1970 to 1999. And the real relevancy of that is as your housing matures and ages, you have higher maintenance costs. So if you're providing a housing supply for a lower part of the economic market, people come into housing stock, they don't realize, hey, I gotta replace my roof or my siding or my heater, things like that. So then, not having that extra surplus cash, it makes that much harder to maintain a structure. So we do see the decline from that.
A big part of that is the insulation,
Yeah.
the energy costs, because prior to 1972, energy was really cheap.
Yep. The energy code has changed. Housing unit size, this shows you just visually the ranges of units, in terms of bedrooms. The bulk of the housing is 2 to 4 bedrooms. When you look at affordable housing or moderate income housing, the strategy is to try to get more studios or more one-bedroom units built. That provides housing for that group of unmarried students coming out of school that don't want to live with college roommates, but also people just entering the workforce. Demand, this is looking at future demand based on your rates or levels of income relative to the AMI. So with our 1.2% average growth rate in population, over the next 10 years, we need 2,388 new units or additional units to house that additional population. And this doesn't include student housing, just so we're clear on that. But you look down the breakdown based on where our AMI is, we need 1,500 units that will satisfy this bulk of our population that's under that 8% AMI. Does that make sense? So we need a larger chunk of housing that's more affordable that meets the needs of people that have less income. We also anticipate that the student housing demand will be 800 to 1,000 additional units by 2030 based on their growth rates.
How do you encourage that kind of development?
Student housing?
No, the below the 80%.
That's the challenge.
Yeah, like how do we do that?
Well, we'll talk about strategies and hopefully they'll be, effective. So when we look at our permit data over the last decade, we've actually permitted over 600 new single-family units, 628 attached 2 to 4 units, multifamily 1,600 units, and then mobile homes 100 units. So just a little under 3,000.
So you're talking structures or units within structures?
I'm talking units by structure type. So a detached single family is your typical home. Your attached 2 to 4 unit could be a fourplex, could be 4 townhomes in a row, but we count each unit within that building as a unit. So
Okay, so the 5 and above, we haven't built 1,600 multifamily projects.
1,600 units.
We've just put in 1,600 units.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Okay, housing affordability. Again, based on 2020 data, when you look at these household income ranges, if you are at 30% of AMI or less, your income range is less than $26,000 a year, in theory, your maximum monthly income for housing expenses is $655. And this is the maximum you qualify for a mortgage. And I think today, in 2022, that's probably unrealistic, right? You can't find that.
Double.
So what do you do if you're at that income range? You double up, you triple up, you live with family, whatever else. If you're in the 80% or less, it's your upper income range is $59,000. Your maximum monthly income is $1,400 or $1,500. That's what you'll qualify for a loan. Again, those become unattainable in today's market.
Is that comprehensive costs or just rent?
No, it's all your housing expenses. So rent or mortgage, utilities, and I think it's like 35% or 50% of your total income.
Okay, thank you.
Here's a breakdown of the existing owner-occupied housings by value and affordability. The largest share are at or above 100% AMI, and then the next largest is in this middle range, 50 to 80%. This one's a little deceiving. Well, it's a little challenging to read. Cost burden and severely cost burden. If you're cost burden, it means you're spending at least 30% of your income on housing expenses or monthly housing expenses. If you're severely cost burden, you're spending at least half of your income on monthly housing costs. And so when you look down this lower area, less than 30%, you're spending a higher percentage or proportion of your income on housing than you are if you're at the 100%.
Yeah.
And so again, that begs the question, how do you provide housing for that group of folks that doesn't cost them everything that they make? So this is a snapshot of time in the market in August. And, it's a little deceptive because when you go, it's right before school starting, but literally when we looked at what was for rent, this is what was for rent. There are 8 units that we could find on 4 or 5 different platforms. And then when you look at what was available for purchase on this day, literally there's about 175 units available, and the majority of them are above this income range.
And this is strictly in the city of Logan?
Strictly in the city of Logan, yeah. And so if we did it today, we'd probably see a little difference in terms of what's available to purchase, given the interest rates have gone up. You're not really seeing a huge softening on pricing to kind of catch up to it yet, but you're seeing a bigger inventory. So median rents based on bedroom count as of 2020, and I think these are low now. If you've got a 3-bedroom unit that you're renting, they say it's $1,000 in 2020, it's probably $1,500 now for that size of unit, if not more. Renter household by income level.
So is it a no bedroom means a studio?
Pardon me?
On that chart, no bedroom means a studio?
That's correct.
Okay. It's not a storage unit.
It would convert a garage.
It's a shipping container.
Could be a shipping container. Tiny home.
Yeah.
Trailer. You look at our household income renter household by income level, it's fairly consistent across the income strata. This is our cost burden renter households. It's the same thing. You look at the very low income renters, 73% of them are really severely cost burdened. So I won't go through the summary of housing trends. And then the question we have to ask and answer is, do our zoning regulations preclude modern income housing? We've got lots of other issues. So our zoning is pretty liberal when you look at the valley. You can find zoning that ranges from 2 units a acre all the way to 40 plus that when you look in town centers. So I'm not sure our zoning really has an impact, but we do have other issues that go with it. We lack vacant land that's easily developable for multifamily projects. And we've seen a lot of rezone requests go from commercial to multifamily. And this will be something we'll just have to address as we move forward in our general plan and our zoning. Okay, so this is the strategy. These are the strategies that the Planning Commission came up with. There's 8 of them. And then in your packet we sent out, there was the entire list of 26 strategies in there, and then they chose these 8. And then I'll go through the implementation plan. It goes along with these. They're kind of hard to see on the screen, but.
So they chose these 8 based on recommendations from community development, or where did the 8 come from?
I gave them a little bit different mix of recommendations. I mean, and let me preface it by saying some of the recommendations that are in your packet are what I put in there because we're going to do it anyway. So like we're going to do the general plan update, which has a lot of things that will spawn off of that, and that all qualifies for a strategy under moderate income housing. But I just gave you kind of a template of what I was looking at. I tried to arrange it by short-term, medium, and long-term types of approaches. But this is what they came up with.
Okay.
So, and I didn't arrange this based on timing. I just kind of went through from 1 to 8 or 1 to 10, whatever's in here. And each one of these, each strategy actually, I converted into a goal, and then under the goal I've got additional strategies that also are relevant. So like the first goal they have was improve neighborhoods by converting existing uninhabitable housing into new moderate income housing. And the strategy under the state's listing is that demonstrate investment in the rehabilitation of existing uninhabitable housing stock into moderate income housing. So it's pretty broad. So in developing a work plan for this over the next year through 2023, what we want to do is update our current vacant building registry. We want to see what's really out there because right now we've got 20 vacant properties. None of those are city-owned. So if we take this approach, does this mean that we, the city, are going to buy vacant houses, rehab them, and flip them? Because if we do that, that's a big chunk of money, right? Or are we going to partner with somebody to do that? So those are the questions that we have to ask and answer as we formulate the ideas to implement this type of strategy. So I don't know if it makes sense or not, but that's kind of what they were assuming to do. Any questions on that? Keep going.
Is this a new one for this plan, or was this also in our plan in 2019?
That's a new one. Yeah. This is a strategy that a former council member pushed on a lot of different fronts about us buying housing stock up and then rehabbing it and flipping it. And the same facts still apply. It's very expensive. We're not in the business of buying houses and being a general contractor and a lot of those things. So it's really have to take a hard approach or a hard look at this.
I think Sam needs some more work. So.
Give it to Sam. Sam's young. Super bright, motivated.
Sam is not nodding his head.
So if we accept this recommendation or any of these recommendations, will it become our responsibility to develop a plan, to put forward a plan? Or will whatever you write down sort of be the framework?
It could be anything you want it to be. So yes, you can accept what they're recommended to you, or you can say, no, we don't like this. Or you can say, yeah, we accept it, but we need to work through the process to really identify and flesh it out. So I tried to be a little vague in terms of the timeline because I don't know how much time it's going to take to sit down and put together a group of people that talk this through to see if it's really realistic. And it might be worthwhile to do that because we're prejudging and really don't know what it means. So what we should do is say, is this a valid strategy for us to pursue as a city? And on face value, yeah, it seems like it is. There's probably some vacant, crappy buildings that we could pick up dirt cheap, invest into them, and then turn around and flip them. But there's all those other questions that go with that.
Or there might be another alternative to that.
Yeah. Or maybe instead of doing that, we can incentivize a builder to do it that way.
The owner to do something.
Yeah, or the owner.
Yeah.
And that's why you keep it on the list, and we can spend a year doing that, just trying to flesh it out, just to see what it means. And it may not mean anything. We may realize at the end of the year, we just say this didn't work for Logan, and we report on that. Off the shelf it goes, and we go on to something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
I've seen cities that had, quote, projects. I've seen cities that developed those types of projects. Excuse me. I've also seen some that incentivized people to do that. So what's the typical?
It varies. So Ogden does a program like this. They get federal funding. It's home funding, I believe they use to rehab existing housing stock. But they also were able to pick up houses that were in foreclosure, so they got them cheap. Could bring them up to current code and then flip them. I think with the current, and this has been a few years, with the current economy, I don't think they can do that as easily or as cheaply.
No.
Yeah.
We've tried to incentivize people. We've given them grants to update their properties. It did a little bit of work, but we found that a lot of them flipped them. So we helped improve the value of your property, then you turn around and flipped it. And so help the neighborhood you win. So there's goods and bads with it. there's different approaches. But it does take a lot of money. And that's the thing is it takes a lot of cash to do this, and then a lot of money in order to make it actually happen. So not only to buy the property, buy the house, then also to actually, invest in it, upgrade it, turn it. It's quite a bit of cash. And so the question is, where do we get the money from? General fund, RDA, we created another type of RDA. I mean, those are all the questions we should ask and answer as we go through this process to evaluate it.
Yeah, my big question with that is, how do you ensure that it stays moderate income housing?
Right.
I mean, it's a great idea, but I know other communities that have done this. Do you put a restricted deed on when somebody can sell it, or if they decide to rent it, it's a little bit more complicated than I think many times people realize.
So should we view these as aspirational statements that have to be worked on?
Yeah, I think you should.
Okay.
Again, I've tried to write them in a sense that they're a goal, and I think they're all attainable, but the level of attainment is going to vary based on the goal.
Okay.
So just for example, another part of this strategy is D, identify, utilize general fund subsidies or other sources of revenue to waive construction-related fees. I think on paper that sounds good, but what's the implication of doing that? So as soon as you take money from this and put it here, somebody else has got to pick up that slack. There's another one here about impact fees. If we waive impact fees for moderate income, what does that do to our impact fee program? And I think that's worthy of analysis. And what we may realize is that as a city, it's not in our best interest to waive impact fees for moderate income housing because, one, we can't guarantee it'll stay moderate income housing forever, and two, our list of projects under the impact fee resolution are too great that we don't want to give those up. So those are the kind of discussions we should have, and I don't think we could have those in the time that I had to do this through the PC to you guys to really do it justice. But at least it's on paper, and it's one of our strategies we as a city can think about.
So there's sort of aspiration.
Well, we can get Sam involved, it would be really super good, because Sam is, right?
So now it's Sam's problem.
Give it to Sam.
So a lot of the report had data from 2020.
Pardon me?
A lot of the report had data from 2020.
Yes.
When could we expect to have?
More current data?
Yes.
2 years.
Probably by 2025. It'll be 2022 data. 2023. But we get the census data and we get American Community Survey data. So it's the census is done in 10-year increments. The ACS is done every year, but I don't know their methodology and how they do that. I'm assuming they do, similar spot survey work, but it's all gathering, compiling it, and then putting it out, and it's all data.
So I have a question, whether now's the right time. So when the gigantic list of options, did we rule out ones that we already are doing? Or are some of these things okay.
No, because those are easy ones.
Yeah, if we're already doing them, we want credit for those.
So out of the whatever was 27 options, how many of those?
If we're doing one of them, we put them in here to make sure they look good.
All right. Thanks.
Goal 2, preserve existing moderate income housing and encourage new moderate income housing through a financial incentive program. So the strategy behind this is you preserve existing moderate income housing, you subsidize units either through a landlord incentive program or through a grant program with new development. When I was going through the list, I didn't put this on there because I thought this would leave a bad taste in our mouths about subsidizing landlords. I just had a hard time with that because we have a lot of slumlords, and I don't mean to say that too derogatory, but we do. And do we want to incentivize them to keep providing substandard housing that people who have limited income live in? And that's a really weird dilemma, and I think it's worthy of talking through, but it's really one that's hard to, it's a challenge to sit with it. So
hopefully we could come up with a way to make it so that it can improve the housing but keep the cost the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, goal 3, accessory dwelling units. When this language came through, we said we'd come back to the council, I think after 12 months or 18 months.
It was passed in September, and we said 18 months. So this spring, we'll have to assess it.
Yeah, so this is on the list. 2021, we did it. So yay us. 2023, we'll come back. This is the low-hanging fruit that everybody looks at because you can you can increase your housing stock with minimal efforts. But that being said, there are a lot of issues, obviously, with us as a college town. Does this open up to a lot of abuse? And right now, we've got, I think, 3 ADUs that have been licensed, 2 or 3. So it's not gotten a lot of legs under it to take off. But it'd be worthy of discussion about, do we look at expanding it from internal to external? How do we get there? Is that something that the community wants? Do we look at expanding it geographically? And so we'll come back in 2023 and have those discussions. So this
Although
one-
there have been quite a few Airbnbs licensed, so,
Yeah.
again, you're taking permanent housing stock off the market and
Turning
Yeah.
into rentals.
turning
Yeah,
into
short-term
Wrong direction.
short-term rentals.
That's on one of them coming up. Okay, goal 4, evaluate waiving city's development fees and impact fees for moderate-income housing. Again, I talked about this. It'd be good this appears to be a low-hanging fruit. Hey, just waive the fees. That'll give everybody an extra 20 grand in their pocket to do something. Well, but there's implications of doing that. And so we want to talk with finance, just figure out what does that really mean if we do something like that.
And does it really get passed on to the end user?
Right, exactly. Probably not.
You'd have to have a lot of guardrails to make it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have to ask yourself, is it really worth it? Do you really get what you're wanting to get out of it if you have so many guardrails on it? Let's see, goal 5. This one is kind of hard to read. It's got a lot in it. But basically, evaluate our land development code. We figure out if there are any short-term regulatory changes we can make to encourage more moderate income housing. And you can read all those strategies in there, but there are things that we can do. We can look at implementing zone incentives in the different zones to, like we did for mixed use. We'll give you a density bonus. You do moderate income housing in there. We can look at doing single room occupancy developments. That's similar to that bill at 364. We can look at, there's a thing called mixed middle housing. At some point we'll have to tackle that. Do you want to allow duplexes in standard single family neighborhoods? That one's going to be a little bit more challenging, I think. So there's things that we can do. One thing that we probably should talk about is our occupancy, how we regulate occupancy. It's a bad word, occupancy, but there are some communities that have an over-occupancy program where it's based on the property. If you've got enough bedrooms, enough parking, no impacts, you can pull a permit to do over-occupancy based on, 1 kid per bedroom or something like that. So something like that would provide more housing, but it's going to target probably the student population. So that's something we could talk through, but it's good to have on the list. So if you see, I put on here that moderate income housing density bonus, we did the mixed use, we just adopted that. So we can have discussions over the next year about, are there language code changes that we think are relatively easy to adopt, to implement, and then kind of work through. Parking analysis is another one. We should look at parking. So, okay, goal 6. This is longer term, update our general plan and all the spin-offs from it. We're going to do it, so I put it on the list because we're going to do it. And we're starting it already. The annexation plan 2022, this moderate housing plan is an element of this general plan, so we want to get credit for it. But we'll start this in 2024. We start going through the big plan. Goal 7, workforce housing program. I put this in here because we had talked with Visionary Homes a year ago about a project they're doing called Rivergate, and they wanted to turn it into, provide some kind of lending program, part of a way to market the product, but also as a way to get mortgages out there for teachers, firefighters, police officers, public employees, but also probably teachers and stuff like that. So I left it in here because it's still worthy of having a discussion about it. And I don't, maybe with Visionary, I could write it a little broader, but also the mayor's talked to another entity about doing the same thing. So
On a little broader scale, again, Representative Waldrop, who was one of the co-chairs of the Housing Task Force, has actually been working with some potential lenders up in Cache Valley. So that might be an option to explore further as that develops.
Ivory Homes does it down Salt Lake Valley. They've got a model that we can follow that Visionary talked about. So, it may have some legs, but again, it's going to take time to kind of really sit down and talk it through to figure it out. Goal 8, partnerships. This is similar, but also working with like Neighborhood Housing Solutions Group. Do we look at taking our property over on 3rd North, 1st East, over by Maverick, and working with that group to provide some senior housing, low moderate. Those are discussions we ought to have, and there may be value in that property doing something else, but at least we can say we're trying to figure out a way to get there, so. And I think that is it. Any questions?
Lots to think about.
Digest it.
That's what I got.
It's, I guess, encouraging that we have built 3,000 units in the last 10 years, but we need 3,000 more in the next 10 years. Is what it looks like. So that's encouraging that we've actually been able to keep up with that potential.
We've actually built more units than we have added to our population. So I think our housing growth is just under 2% and our population growth is 1.2%. So that tells you we're building a lot of rentals, primarily for students, but other renters don't necessarily get counted in that total.
Especially if we see our homeowners' occupancy going down,
right,
because we're building so many more rentals.
Right.
So.
As the league says, cities permit housing, cities don't build housing in general. So, and again, I think that's their argument, as the legislature comes back with all these things and want us to, give up impact fees or whatever. It's like, look at the permits. And there's actually a report I probably should share with you. They gave us to a conference, so some of you may have seen it. I mean, cities across the state have done a tremendous amount to permit new housing units, but it
takes a long time to build them.
Yeah.
Well, when you change interest rates too, you change that ability to borrow money cheaply, obviously, and so the fees are going to.
Maybe that's something
they're going to go up again.
Yeah, that's something we need to look at. Is maybe we can incentivize some developers to build by offering lower interest loans. If we build a RDA, maybe that's a great way to reuse that money multiple times and say, hey, we'll loan you $1 million, but you're going to pay it back, and then we're going to lend it to somebody else and then do it again. So
talk to Rich, see where you get $1 million.
I don't know if we could be a banker.
Yeah.
Where do we get these millions?
I know. If we create a new RDA, we've got the money. That's a good way to reuse that money multiple times.
I think one comment we often get though too is why aren't we encouraging property that people can own? But same thing, you can't demand that somebody build a townhouse development and that they sell it versus that they rent it. So unless there is, I've never heard of a city being able to say, you can't, we're not going to zone you can't run it. So I think that's a big frustration people express, and constant statement has to be, we can't tell somebody who's building something that they have to sell it.
Right.
So.
Well, and they do say they sell it, but they sell 10 units to one person.
Yeah.
Who then rents them.
Yeah.
So, Mike, all of this is based on the LMI, the percentage and so forth. So have we increased in our wages? Or is that going up at all? We have a lot of new industries coming in. That's another approach, is to try to encourage better paying jobs for that segment of the population.
Yeah, so our income has risen since the last time we reported on this. It's gone up, but has it gone up to keep pace with the rate of increase?
It might be not going up as fast as cost of living.
Right.
Since the 35% includes your utilities and your mortgage and all of those things, as interest rates go up, if I have an increase in salary, I'm still gonna be at that lower percentage.
Yeah, and we should encourage more industrial type of growth that brings in the higher paying jobs. But again, you can encourage it as long as we've got the jobs available. Doesn't mean you'll get the people who live in Logan to have access to those jobs. You'll get them countywide. But it still benefits us, obviously, because the bulk of your shopping is in Logan too.
Oh, yeah.
So, any more questions?
Thanks, Mike.
Nice work.
Thank you.
We'll move now to our budget adjustment, Rich.
I have several items to consider. The first is a request to appropriate $6,800 of donated funds toward the police department taser replacement program. A request to appropriate $154,105, our 911 fund, received from the state of Utah for operational improvements. This is the second year we received this grant and hope it continues in the future. A request to appropriate $600,000 of commercial connection fee revenue to increase the budget in our electrical fund for associated construction projects. These are both projects that have already occurred, some of them, as well as many that are on the plan that will complete later this year.
So is that required because of the increase in costs, or is that a planned?
So we budget for X amount. It's kind of our base level of connection fees. And then if we have a year like we did this year, where we have a lot of commercial development still going on, we would come back to council because the cost associated with the new development is the connection fee.
Okay.
So we are exceeding our revenues. That's the good news. But bad news is we're short on budget.
Right.
So what are the operational improvements for 911?
So, as Rich said, this was the second year that we received money from Utah Communications Authority, and it's actually kind of we call it a grant. It's not necessarily a grant specifically, but
it's kind of a revenue share might be more appropriate. But
yeah, I would say they basically have a set of minimum standards and best practices that they establish for 911 PSAPs, which is the public safety answering point for the state of Utah. So if a PSAP meets the minimum requirements and completes the best practices, they get a proportionate of additional 911 revenue that is divided throughout the state. So we ended up with 7% of the money, so there is PSAPs that don't meet certain requirements. It's a long meeting tonight anyway, so I don't want to bore you to death with what the requirements are, but we certainly are proud that we have met all of them, that we qualified for the money. We're not, a real high call volume area of the state. We have, we're not along the Wasatch Front, so we don't have a huge amount of calls for service through 911, but we intend to use the money. This year we have a couple of things that we want to, that we know we're going to try to move some projects forward, one of them being to get a live feed of some of the UDOT cameras so that we have, better situational awareness, in the wintertime of Sardine Canyon and Logan Canyon, or even in Logan, certain traffic issues and things that we can have a better idea of what's going on outside of our windows. And then the other part will be likely to automate the paging system with our fire and EMS partners so that when we have calls for ambulances and fires throughout the county, that it streamlines that process and gets them notified and going faster. So those are a couple of things that we're hoping to do with the money. Thanks. Any other questions?
the last two items, request to appropriate $435,000 toward substation 9 and 10. During the carry forward process, this is one that I overlooked. There's some confusion about what was to be carried forward. However, there was $232,000 that should have been carried forward, but the project has also had overruns of about $200,000. Same story with many of our construction projects, but this amount should complete subs 9 and 10. And then lastly, a request to appropriate $792 from a state of Utah grant for our library for Wi-Fi hotspots.
Fabulous. Any questions? Any other considerations this evening? We will adjourn the meeting of the Logan City Council, and we will reconvene as the Logan Redevelopment Agency. And we have one workshop item. Kurt?
Okay, RDA Board, we're seeking additional funding for the Plaza project. It's progressing well. There's been a few stalls and surprises, of course, but we're looking for an additional $500,000 in funding for the Plaza and the reshell of the Plaza 45 building. So just to create some context for the reason behind that appropriation request is that if you look at the 14, 15 months that transpired from when we initially came to the board for an appropriation, which was March of 2021, and then we ultimately entered into a construction contract in June of 22, so nearly a year and a half time passed. We were in a highly inflationary environment and costs, and we even came to the RDA board using the high end of the architectural estimate on cost. We tried to obviously be conservative, allow ourselves some wiggle room on the funding of this project. But in that time period, costs increased over $1.5 million, so about a 33% hike in costs. Inflation is nothing new for anyone. We're all experiencing it in different areas. Construction industry is no different. Steel, concrete costs, labor costs. So that's really the lion's share of it. Also, tearing into old buildings, taking down the Emporium, taking down that north-facing wall of Plaza 45. You've encountered some things, that maybe you didn't anticipate until you get into that. Some of these buildings are over 100 years old. So that's led to various change orders as we've had to maybe do some weather proofing and some more structural support for the Plaza 45 building, as well as, you get into it and realize you got to make some scope changes a little bit too. So those changes totaled about $500,000, some of those demolition related changes. The good news is that Mayor Daines, in an effort to enhance the plaza, make it a better experience, during this past year and a half, approached various donors in the community, potential donors, and was able to secure, as you know, $2.2 million of private donations to enhance the plaza. With that came, some design changes, which all told was about $800,000, adding various new features to make the plaza better, also covered some design fees associated with that. But the good news is that leaves about $1.4 million in excess, if you want to describe it that way, that can help mitigate this inflationary problem. So were it not for what the mayor accomplished, the situation would be more challenging. But thanks to those donations, we're in a much better situation. So also, many of these expenses will be buried into or are funding the Plaza 45 building, and we will ultimately resell that building at the right time and with the right user. So we will have that cash inflow coming down the road into the RDA, which will help our situation too. So we have appropriated and encumbered within the budget about $6.96 million. $6.6 million, but we have another almost $7 million still coming at us. So we're roughly at about $360,000 in bare bones need of additional funding, but because we're still just midstream into this construction project, or really just kind of early on in the construction phase, we want to allow ourselves with enough cushion in case there's some other changes that come up too. The good news on that front, so we are asking $500,000, but we anticipate that some of that will be covered by additional donations. I know the mayor's been working on securing additional commitments, so we're appreciative of all her hard work on that front. So again, our appropriation for the board is $500,000 to help us get to the finish line on the Plaza and Plaza 45 project.
And we'll have some more information on that additional contribution in 2 weeks for you. But again, that will help offset some of what we need in that amount.
So are you saying all the money from the sale of that property will come back to the RDA?
Yes,
Okay.
RDA funds were used to purchase that.
Okay.
Any other questions of Kirk? Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
And now we are officially adjourned.
Thank you. Good job. Could I, have you set up for